Hello everyone, ready for another story? If you want to be part of our community of lovers of good stories, please leave your like and subscribe to the channel. The click of the camera flashbulbs exploded like small bursts of magnesium white stars, momentarily blinding the crowd gathered on the steps of St. Thomas Church. It was 1924, and the marriage of Arthur Harrington to Evelyn Sinclair was not merely a union, it was a merger, the most significant social and financial event of the New York season. The press called it the Pact of Dynasties, though one dynasty was flush with unimaginable new wealth, and the other was clinging to the echoes of its old name. Evelyn Sinclair, now Harrington, felt the chill of the October air through her ivory silk and lace gown. The dress was a Parisian import, a whisper of modern audacity with its dropped waist, yet suffocatingly traditional in its opulence. It was a gown purchased not with her family's dwindling funds, but by the vast, impersonal fortune of the man whose arm she now held. She smiled, a perfect practiced curve of her lips that did not reach her violet eyes. The crowd saw an aristocrat, a portrait of Bostonian grace, composed and elegant. They did not see the cold calculation that had led her to this altar. Her family, the Sinclairs, were on the precipice of ruin, their name the only asset they had left. This marriage was their salvation. Beside her stood Arthur Harrington. He was a tall man, impeccably dressed in a tailored morning suit that emphasized the severe lines of his broad shoulders. His dark hair was slicked back, and his gaze, directed over the sea of faces and flashing bulbs, was as impenetrable as the granite facade of his bank on Wall Street. He was known, in gossip columns and trading floors alike, as the cold Duke of Fifth Avenue. He was a magnate, a baron of industry who had built an empire from the ashes of the war, a man whose net worth was discussed in hushed, awestruck tones. He was also completely, utterly unreadable. He had offered her father a solution to his debts, and the price had been Evelyn. "Mrs. Harrington," he said, his voice a low, smooth baritone that offered no warmth. He did not look at her, but guided her firmly toward the gleaming black Rolls-Royce waiting at the curb. The crowd surged, throwing rice and petals. Evelyn inclined her head, the heavy veil brushing his shoulder. "Mr. Harrington." The car door shut with a heavy, satisfying thunk, sealing them in an opulent cocoon of polished mahogany, cut-glass vases, and grey velvet upholstery. The roar of the crowd was instantly muted, replaced by the heavy silence between them. The car smelled faintly of expensive leather and his cologne, a sharp, clean scent of sandalwood and something metallic. She sat perfectly still, her hands folded over her bouquet of lilies. She had met Arthur Harrington exactly 4 times before this day. Each meeting had been a negotiation, orchestrated by their fathers. There had been no courtship, no stolen glances, no shared jokes over cocktails at the plaza. There had been only terms. Arthur turned his attention to the window, watching the city blur past as the limousine moved smoothly into the flow of traffic, heading uptown toward the palatial mansion that was now her home. "The reception will last 3 hours, he stated, as if discussing a board meeting. "We will circulate separately for the first hour to greet the guests. We will dine at the head table. We will have the first dance. After that, you may retire if you wish. My associates from the bank will be present, and I will have business to conclude." "Understood," Evelyn replied, her voice just as level. "A performance, then." For the first time, his gaze snapped to hers. His eyes were a surprising shade of grey, not cold like stone, but like the deep, turbulent sea before a storm. "Marriage is a contract, Mrs. Harrington. We have both fulfilled our obligations. Today is merely the public ratification." "A contract," she repeated softly, looking down at the impossibly large diamond on her left hand. It felt like a beautiful, glittering manacle. Of course. She had known what this would be. She was not a naive girl dreaming of romance. She was a Sinclair, taught from birth that duty and legacy were paramount. She had accepted her fate to save her parents from the humiliation of poverty, to ensure her younger siblings could complete their educations. She would be the mistress of one of the greatest houses in New York, draped in jewels and furs, commanding a staff of dozens. She would be fabulously wealthy, endlessly admired, and entirely, profoundly alone. The Harrington mansion on Fifth Avenue was a monument to Gilded Age excess, a limestone behemoth that occupied half a block. Its grandeur made her family's Bostonian townhouse look like a gatekeeper's cottage. As they ascended the grand marble staircase, the sound of the string quartet drifted from the ballroom, a polite, precise melody that lacked any soul. The reception was exactly as he had predicted. A crush of high society, industry titans and banking associates, all eager to see the cold duke and his new bride. Evelyn played her part to perfection. She smiled. She laughed lightly at the appropriate moments. She discussed the European markets with the senator and complimented the Vanderbilt pearls with effortless charm. She was the perfect hostess, the perfect asset. Arthur was equally flawless. He moved through the room with a reserved, commanding presence. Men deferred to him. Women watched him with a mixture of fear and fascination. He was the center of gravity in any room he occupied, a man of immense power and financial influence, whose every word could shift fortunes. Their dance was a study in practiced precision. He held her correctly, his hand resting formally on her waist, his body close but not intimate. They moved across the polished floor, a perfect couple, the envy of everyone present. Yet Evelyn felt as if she were dancing with an automaton. "You perform your duties well," he murmured, his voice too low for anyone else to hear as he executed a flawless turn. "As do you, Mr. Harrington," she replied, tilting her head back to meet his gaze. "I trust the merger of our names will prove profitable." A flicker of something, surprise, amusement, passed through those grey eyes, so quick she almost missed it. "It already has." When the dance concluded, he bowed stiffly and released her, immediately enveloped by a group of men discussing steel tariffs and railroad bonds. Evelyn excused herself, seeking a moment of respite on one of the balconies overlooking the manicured gardens. The noise of the party, the drone of stock prices and speakeasy gossip, faded behind the thick velvet curtains. She looked out over the city lights, the sky glowing orange above the silhouette of Central Park. The jazz age was roaring all around her, a symphony of frantic energy, illegal gin and soaring optimism. Fortunes were being made and lost in a single day. Flappers were dancing the Charleston, and the world was spinning faster than ever before. And here she was, 22 years old, shackled to a man who looked at her as if she were a new acquisition, a valuable painting just added to his collection. A wave of desolation washed over her, so potent it made her clutch the cold stone balustrade. She had traded her future for security, her heart for a house. She stayed there for a long time, the cold air a welcome shock against her heated skin. The party wound down. The music stopped. The last of the chauffeured cars pulled away from the curb. When she finally returned to the cavernous, silent house, the staff had vanished. The lights were dimmed, casting long shadows across the opulent foyer. Arthur was standing at the base of the staircase, his back to her, staring up at a large oil painting of one of his ancestors. "I trust the evening met your expectations," she said, her voice echoing in the marble hall. He did not turn. It served its purpose. He finally faced her, his expression unreadable in the dim light. His formal tie was gone, the top button of his shirt undone, the first sign of disorder she had ever seen on him. "This is your wing," he said, gesturing to the east side of the upper floor. "Your suites are prepared. My owner in the west wing. We will maintain separate quarters." Evelyn felt a strange, sharp pang. It was not disappointment. It was clarification. The final term of the contract, unspoken until now. It was relief, she told herself. A cold marriage was one thing. A cold marriage bed was a mercy. "Thank you," she said, maintaining her poise. "That is most practical." "I value practicality, Mrs. Harrington. It is the foundation of all stable investments." He looked at her, his gaze lingering for a moment. "Your family's accounts will be settled in the morning. You are very efficient. Good night." He turned and ascended the west staircase, his footsteps silent on the thick Persian runner, disappearing into the shadows of his own separate world. Evelyn watched him go. The cold duke, the financial magnata, her husband. She was now the duchess of a cold, empty kingdom. She picked up the train of her expensive, useless wedding gown and walked alone up the east staircase toward her new life, a gilded cage built of assets and practicality. The silence of the great house was absolute, broken only by the distant, lonely cry of a ship's horn on the Hudson. She had her wealth, her family was safe, but as she entered her luxurious, empty suite, Evelyn Sinclair Harrington realized she had never felt more bankrupt. The first few months of their marriage unfolded with the predictable, sterile rhythm of a stock ticker. Arthur Harrington was a man of intense, unwavering routine. He rose at dawn, consumed a Spartan breakfast alone while reading the financial pages, and was driven to Wall Street before the city had fully awakened. Evelyn, accustomed to the more leisurely pace of Boston society, found herself the solitary mistress of a house that ran on silent, efficient machinery. The staff, led by a formidable housekeeper named Mrs. Davies, anticipated her every need before she was aware of it, leaving her with absolutely nothing to do. She was given an allowance so vast it seemed fictitious, a line of credit at every major department store in Manhattan. She bought the requisite flapper dresses for parties, the cloche hats, the ropes of pearls. She attended luncheons with other wealthy wives, women who discussed their decorators, their bootleggers, and their investments with equal, bored intensity. She hosted dinners at the Fifth Avenue mansion, events that Arthur presided over with the same detached efficiency as their wedding reception. He was a perfect host, discussing politics, finance, and the problem of the prohibition with cold, analytical clarity. But he was never truly present. Their conversations were polite, brief, and confined to logistics. "The Carters are dining with us on Tuesday. They are investors in my new shipping line. I will be in Chicago until Friday. Do not wait up. The opera tickets you requested are on the hall table." Evelyn watched him across the vast expanse of their dining table, night after night. He was, she had to admit, a remarkably handsome man. Not in the slick patent leather way of the young sheiks who frequented the speakeasies, but in a severe classical way. His features were strong, his jaw firm, his grey eyes sharp and intelligent, but his face was a mask, a fortress of control. He never laughed, he rarely smiled, and when he did, it was a brief, cynical twist of the lips, usually after outmaneuvering a competitor on the telephone. She was trapped in a life of supreme luxury and profound emotional isolation. The house, for all its priceless art and Gobelin tapestries, felt less like a home and more like a museum. She was just another acquisition, the Sinclair piece, added to the Harrington collection. But Evelyn was not a woman built for passivity. Her mind was as sharp as his, educated at Radcliffe, fluent in French and Latin. Boredom, she found, was a powerful motivator. She began to observe her husband, not as a wife, but as an analyst, studying a complex financial report. She started to notice the cracks in his perfect, controlled facade. It began with the music. Arthur famously despised the chaos of the jazz age. He tolerated the polite string quartets at his parties, but had openly dismissed the vulgar noise of the Charleston and the saxophone. Yet one night, as she was passing his study, a room in the forbidden West Wing she had never entered, she heard music. It was not a recording. It was a piano. The melody was complex, discordant, and achingly beautiful. It was jazz. She froze, her hand on the gilded doorknob. The music was passionate, raw, and full of a desperate energy. It was everything Arthur Harrington was not. She listened for several minutes, captivated until the music stopped abruptly, followed by a heavy, frustrated silence. She retreated quickly, her mind racing. Then came the disappearances. Several nights a week, Arthur would return from Wall Street, dine in silence, and then, around 10 o'clock, his private car would be brought around. He would leave, impeccably dressed, but not in his usual dinner jacket. He wore simpler, darker suits, almost vanishing into the night. "Where does Mr. Harrington go?" she asked his driver, a taciturn man named Thomas, one afternoon while feigning an interest in the limousine's maintenance. Thomas, loyal to his employer, merely tipped his cap. "Mr. Harrington has an investments, ma'am, all over the city." But Evelyn knew what his investment clothes looked like. This was different. He often returned in the small hours of the morning just before dawn. She knew because she was often awake, reading in her vast, lonely bed. And when he returned, she noticed something else. He didn't smell of stale cigar smoke and brandy, the typical sense of a late-night business meeting. He smelled of tobacco smoke, yes, but also of cheap perfume, sweat, and something else. A vibrant, electric scent she couldn't place. It was the smell of life. Her curiosity, stifled for months, ignited. This was a puzzle, a discrepancy in the ledger, and she found she was desperate to solve it. One frigid November evening, she made a decision. Arthur had left just moments before, vanishing into the back of the Rolls-Royce. Evelyn, dressed in a dark wool coat and a low-brimmed cloche hat that obscured her features, slipped out the servants' entrance. She hailed a yellow cab, an act she had never performed as Mrs. Harrington. "Follow that Rolls-Royce," she said, her voice muffled by her scarf. "And please don't be seen." The cab driver, chewing on a toothpick, gave her a sideways glance in the rearview mirror. "Whatever you say, lady. You got the dough, I got the gas." The chase was surprisingly easy. Arthur's car was not speeding. It moved with a steady, confident purpose. Evelyn expected it to stop at another mansion on Park Avenue, or perhaps a private high-stakes poker game at a downtown hotel. Instead, the Rolls-Royce left the opulent, gas-lit avenues of Midtown. It moved north, past the boundaries of polite society, past the brightly lit theaters and respectable restaurants. It drove deep into Harlem. Evelyn's heart began to pound. Harlem was the epicenter of the New Age, the heart of the Renaissance, vibrant and alive. But it was not a place where men like Arthur Harrington, white, wealthy, conservative bankers, went for investments. The Rolls-Royce finally pulled into a dark, unassuming alley off 135th Street. The street was alive with sound, music spilling from windows, people laughing on the sidewalks. But this alley was quiet. Thomas, the driver, got out and opened the door for Arthur. Evelyn paid her cabbie, telling him to wait around the corner. She slipped into the shadows of the alley, her silk-stockinged feet silent on the cobblestones. She watched as Arthur Harrington, the cold Duke, walked not to a grand entrance, but to a solid, unmarked steel door at the back of what looked like a derelict warehouse. He didn't knock. He pulled a single key from his pocket, unlocked the door, and disappeared inside. Evelyn waited for a full minute, her breath pluming in the cold. The alley was empty. Taking a risk, she crept forward to the steel door. There was no peephole, no sign. She pressed her ear against the cold metal. At first, nothing. Then she felt it. A low, rhythmic vibration, a bass line, and through the steel, muffled but undeniable, she heard the driving, exuberant sound of a saxophone. She stepped back, confused. This made no sense. Arthur Harrington, in a Harlem speakeasy. She noticed a faint glow coming from a grimy window high above. She moved down the alley, finding a stack of wooden crates. Gathering her courage and lifting her skirt, Evelyn climbed onto the crates, balancing precariously, until she could peer through the dirty glass. What she saw made her grip the window ledge to keep from falling. It was a speakeasy, but unlike any she had imagined. It wasn't a grimy basement. It was a vast, vibrant cavern, packed with people of every color, all dressed to the nines. Flappers with beaded dresses danced wildly with men in sharp suits. The air was thick with smoke, the tables crowded with illicit cocktails. It was a riot of life, noise, and joyful defiance. The club was called the Crimson Key, according to a glowing red sign behind the bar. But it was the stage that held her captive. At the center of it all, seated at a gleaming grand piano, was a man. He wore his shirt sleeves rolled up, his tie loosened, and his dark hair was falling over his forehead. He was playing with a ferocious, joyful abandon, his fingers flying across the keys in a complex, passionate torrent of ragtime and blues. A black woman with a voice like velvet sang beside him, her voice weaving in and out of his melody. Evelyn's hand flew to her mouth. It was Arthur, it was her husband, the cold Duke of Fifth Avenue, the man who valued practicality above all else, the man who despised the chaos of jazz. And he was not just in a speakeasy, he was the heart of it. He was playing the piano with a soul and a fire she could never have imagined, a look of pure, unadulterated ecstasy on his face. He was smiling. It was a real, unguarded, breathtaking smile. She stared, unblinking, as the song reached its crescendo. The crowd erupted in cheers, whistling and stomping. Arthur threw his head back and laughed, a genuine hearty sound that she had never heard. He nodded to the singer, wiped his brow, and seamlessly transitioned into a low, smoky blues melody. This was his secret. Not another woman, not a gambling den, this music, this life. The man she had married was a complete, total stranger, and in that moment, watching him play, Evelyn felt the first, terrifying crack in the ice around her own heart. The secret she had uncovered wasn't just his passion, it was his humanity. Evelyn returned to the Fifth Avenue mansion long before her husband, her mind a whirlwind of confusion, shock, and a strange, unfamiliar flicker of excitement. She lay awake in her silk-sheeted bed, listening to the silent house, trying to reconcile the two Arthurs. There was the cold, calculating magnate who ruled Wall Street, the man who discussed her like an asset. And then there was Art, the passionate musician in a Harlem speakeasy, his entire being alive with a fire that was the antithesis of his public persona. The dissonance was staggering. She found she could no longer look at him the same way. The next morning at breakfast, one of the rare occasions they were in the dining room at the same time, she watched him over the rim of her coffee cup. He was as he always was, immersed in the Wall Street Journal, his face a mask of concentration, His words clipped. "The Federal Reserve's discount rate is suicidal," he muttered to himself, marking a column with a silver pen. Evelyn, emboldened by her discovery, dared to probe. "You were out late again last night, Mr. Harrington." His eyes didn't lift from the paper. "My investments require significant oversight." "Of course," she said, a small, dangerous smile playing on her lips. "I imagine the market was particularly volatile." He finally looked up, his grey eyes sharp and assessing. "Indeed, but I find the returns are well worth the risk." She held his gaze, a silent challenge passing between them. He suspected nothing, she was sure, but the hidden knowledge made her feel for the first time that she was not as powerless in this relationship as she had believed. She did not confront him. The secret was too precious, too potent. It was hers, but she could not stay away. A week later she went back. This time she did not skulk in the alley. She had prepared. She wore her most daring evening dress, a shimmering deep emerald sheath that clung to her figure, adorned with ropes of black pearls. Her hair was cut into a fashionable, sharp bob just the week before. She looked every inch the modern flapper, albeit a very expensive one. She walked not to the back alley but to the front entrance of the building, which was disguised as a closed tailor's shop. She gave the password she had overheard the cabbie mention, "Red Key High Note," to the formidable bouncer at the door. The peephole slid open. A pair of eyes looked her up and down, and the door clicked open. She descended a narrow staircase, the sound of the music growing louder, pulling her in. As she stepped into the main room of the Crimson Key, the energy of the place hit her like a physical force. It was packed, electric, and blissfully integrated. Black poets argued with white stockbrokers at the bar, and chorus girls from the Cotton Club danced with college boys. No one recognized her. Here, she was not Mrs. Arthur Harrington, the Duchess of Fifth Avenue. She was just another face in the crowd, seeking the thrill of the forbidden. She found a small shadowed table near the back, ordering a glass of champagne, real, French and shockingly expensive, from a passing waitress, and she watched. Art, was at the piano. He was in his element, the undisputed king of this underground court. He played with an effortless brilliance, his left hand laying down a complex, driving rhythm, while his right danced across the keys in dazzling improvisations. The singer from the other night, a stunning woman named Sadie, leaned against the piano, her voice a sultry counterpoint to his music. Their chemistry was palpable, a shared language of notes and rhythm. Evelyn felt a sharp, unexpected pang of jealousy. It was absurd. Her marriage was a contract, yet seeing him share that unguarded intimacy with another woman, even a musical one, stung. She watched him for hours. She saw a side of him that was generous, warm, even playful. He bought a round of drinks for the entire band. He listened intently as a young trumpet player nervously explained a new musical idea. He laughed, that deep, genuine laugh, when Sadie teased him about a flubbed note. This was the man he kept hidden from the world, hidden from her. Why? Why the elaborate charade? Why partition his life so completely? Men of his class had mistresses, they had gambling addictions, they had countless vices. But this, a passion for jazz, a secret life as a brilliant musician in Harlem, it was not a vice, it was a soul. As the night wore on, Arthur finally took a break. He wiped his face with a handkerchief, grabbed a glass of whiskey from the bar, and started to move through the crowd. Evelyn's heart leaped into her throat. She sank lower in her chair, hoping the shadows and the smoke would hide her. He was heading directly toward her section. She turned her head, pretending to watch the dance floor, but it was too late. He stopped just a few feet away, his body going rigid. "Evelyn." His voice was not the low, assured tone of Art on the stage, nor the cold clip of Mr. Harrington at the bank. It was a sharp, shocked whisper, laced with something she couldn't identify. Anger, fear. She lifted her chin, her mask of polite indifference sliding perfectly into place, though her pulse was hammering. "Good evening, Mr. Harrington. I didn't realize your investments were so musical." His face, which had been so open and alive moments before, shuttered instantly. The cold Duke was back, his eyes turning to icy granite. He scanned the room, his jaw tight. "What are you doing here?" he hissed, grabbing her arm in a grip that was just short of painful. "This is not a place for you." "Clearly it is a place for you," she retorted, refusing to be intimidated. She pulled her arm free. "And I find I quite enjoy the atmosphere. The music is remarkable. Your performance was illuminating. You should not have followed me." "I didn't follow you tonight," she said coolly, taking a sip of her champagne. "I followed you last week. Tonight I came for a drink." His expression was thunderous. He looked around again, ensuring no one was paying attention to their tense, low-voiced argument. "We are leaving now." "I don't think so. I'm enjoying the show," she challenged. "You don't understand what this place is," he ground out, his voice dangerously low. "You don't understand the people here, the risks. You in your pearls and your Fifth Avenue name are a target. You are my wife." "A wife you keep in a gilded cage," she shot back, her own anger rising. "A wife who is merely a practical asset. Or is it that you're afraid I'll tell your Wall Street associates that their cold duke is a jazz pianist in a Harlem speakeasy? What would that do to your precious conservative reputation?" The moment the words left her mouth, she knew she had hit a nerve. He flinched as if she had physically struck him. The anger in his eyes was replaced by a flash of raw vulnerability, a deep, profound hurt that stunned her into silence. He looked for a second like a man exposed, his armor shattered. "That," he said, his voice barely audible, "is precisely what you don't understand." Without another word, he turned on his heel and strode back to the bar, not to the piano. He spoke curtly to the bartender, grabbed his suit jacket and walked out the back alley door, leaving her completely alone in the middle of the crowded, noisy club. Evelyn sat there, her victory feeling sour and hollow. She had found his secret. She had confronted him, and in doing so, she had wounded him in a way she hadn't anticipated. She had assumed his secrecy was about protecting his reputation and his financial assets. But the look in his eyes when she threatened to expose him, it was not the look of a banker protecting his investments. It was the look of a man protecting his very soul. She left the club a few minutes later, the vibrant music sounding mocking in her ears. The cab ride back to the mansion was silent. When she arrived, the house was dark, but a single light burned in the west wing. In his study, she hesitated at the bottom of the grand staircase, torn. Part of her, the proper Sinclair, said to retreat to her wing, to let the contract stand, to pretend nothing had happened. But the part of her that had climbed a stack of crates in an alley, the part of her that had felt the music, that had seen the real man, that part of her walked across the marble foyer and toward the west wing, toward the light. She found him in the study. The door was ajar. It was the room where she had first heard him play. It was lined with books, not on finance, but on art, history, and poetry. And in the center, a magnificent Steinway grand piano. He was standing by the window, a glass of whiskey in his hand, staring out at the dark city. He didn't turn when she entered. "You wanted to know why," he said, his voice flat, exhausted. "This is why." He gestured to the room. On the walls, framed, were not stock certificates, but concert programs. Arthur Harrington, pianist. Aeolian Hall, 1917. A Prodigy's debut. Harrington plays Chopin. "I was supposed to be a concert pianist," he said, his back still to her. My father was a practical man, much like I am now. He built the Harrington Empire. He despised music. He saw it as a weakness, a frivolous emotional distraction from the business of accumulating wealth." Evelyn looked at the programs, her mind reeling. "But you played, you debuted." "Against his wishes," Arthur said, a bitter edge to his voice. "My mother supported me. She loved the music. She died when I was 19. After that, he forbade it. When the war came, I enlisted. When I returned, my father was ailing. His partners were stealing him blind. The empire was crumbling." He finally turned to face her. The mask was gone. His face was etched with a weariness so profound it aged him 10 years. "I made a choice," he said. "I let Art, the musician, die, so Arthur Harrington, the magnate, could be born. I rebuilt everything. I became the man he wanted me to be, the man Wall Street needed me to be. Cold, practical, analytical. A man who dealt in assets, not emotions. A man who would never be vulnerable, never be weak." "And the club?" Evelyn asked softly. "I built it with my own money, secretly," he said. "It was the one place art could still exist, the one place I could breathe. It's not just a speakeasy, Evelyn. It's a refuge. I own it. I fund the musicians. I give them the chance my father took from me. The music, jazz, it's everything classical music is supposed to be, but it's free. It's alive." He looked at her, his grey eyes clear and filled with a desperate honesty. "My competitors, my partners, if they knew, they would see it as the one thing a financier cannot be: emotional, unstable, passionate. They would see the cold duke as a fraud, a man driven by something other than profit. They would use it, and they would destroy me. They would ruin my reputation, and in this market, reputation is the only real asset. Evelyn finally understood. The coldness was a shield. The practicality was a suit of armor, forged to protect the small, burning flame of the man he truly was. She had threatened to expose not his secret, but his heart. "Your secret is safe with me," she said, her voice firm. He looked at her, searching her face. "Why? What do you want in return? A larger allowance? More jewels?" Evelyn flinched. The words stung, but she deserved them. "I want," she said, surprising herself, "to go back." "What?" "To the Crimson Key. I want you to take me, not as Mrs. Harrington, the asset, but just to listen to the music." Arthur stared at her, the calculating look returning, but this time it was different. He was re-evaluating her, seeing her for the first time. He saw the proud, intelligent woman who had just discovered his deepest secret and had not run to the society pages, but had come to his study. "It's dangerous," he said, a note of warning. "I'm not afraid of the music," she said, "and I'm not afraid of Harlem. The only thing I've been afraid of is this house, this coldness." He held her gaze for a long moment, a silent negotiation far more profound than the one that had led to their marriage. "Very well," Arthur Harrington said, a new tentative accord settling between them. "But you will do exactly as I say. The Crimson Key is my world, Evelyn, and it plays by very different rules." The following week, the dynamic in the Harrington mansion shifted, subtly but seismically. The silence between them was no longer empty. It was charged with unspoken understanding. When Arthur said, "I have business this evening," Evelyn would reply, "I shall see you there." He would leave through the front door in his Rolls-Royce. She would leave 20 minutes later in a nondescript taxi, dressed in the height of modern fashion, meeting him not as his wife but as his confederate. Arthur had been reluctant, his protective instincts warring with a new, burgeoning curiosity about the woman he had married, but Evelyn was resolute. She arrived at the Crimson Key, and this time Arthur was waiting for her just inside the door. He guided her through the swirling smoke and jubilant crowd, not with the proprietary grip of a husband, but with a light, respectful hand on her elbow. He led her to a secluded booth, shielded from the main floor but with a perfect view of the stage. "Sadie!" he called out, and the stunning blues singer ambled over, a knowing smile on her face. "Well, well," Sadie said, her voice as smooth as velvet. "Look who stepped out of the shadows. I'm Sadie. You must be the uptown mystery." "This is Evelyn," Arthur said, his tone clipped, a hint of his Harrington persona returning. "She is my guest." Sadie laughed, a warm, rich sound. "Your guest, huh? Honey, I've known Art since he was just a scared kid playing for nickels. You're the first guest he's ever brought here, who looks like she belongs on the cover of Vogue." "Relax, Duke," she said, tapping Arthur's chest. "Your secret's safe with all of us." She winked at Evelyn. "Good to see he's finally got some taste in company." Evelyn found herself smiling, genuinely. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Sadie. Your voice is transcendent." Sadie's smile widened. "I like this one, Art." As the night unfolded, Evelyn watched a new hierarchy reveal itself. Arthur wasn't just the owner. He was the patron, the protector. He moved through the club, and the respect he commanded was profound. It wasn't the fear-based deference he received on Wall Street. It was genuine affection. He was Art to them, the man who paid for a new trumpet for the young musician, Pops, who settled the bar tabs for struggling poets, who ensured Sadie and the band were the best-paid performers in Harlem. Later, he took the stage. Evelyn watched, but this time it was different. Knowing his history, his sacrifice, the music was no longer just a passionate performance. It was a confession. Every chord was a word, every melody a sentence from the life he had been forced to abandon. She saw the ghost of the concert pianist in the way his hands commanded the keys, a classical precision underpinning the wild freedom of jazz. When he played a low, mournful blues tune, she felt his loneliness, the weight of the empire he carried. When he broke into a frantic, joyful ragtime, she felt his rebellion, his desperate need for air. She began visiting the club regularly, sometimes with him, sometimes, to his initial protest, which she coolly ignored, on her own. She became a fixture, a quiet, elegant presence in the corner booth. She spoke with Sadie, learning the stories of the musicians. She learned the rhythms of this hidden world, a world that felt more real and vibrant than any of the stifling, perfume-choked drawing rooms of the Upper East Side. The music became their bridge. In the study, which was no longer his study but their room, he would play for her. At first it was hesitant, just fragments of melodies, but she would sit and listen, not offering polite platitudes, but genuinely engaging. "That chord," she said one night, "it sounds unresolved." He looked up from the keys, surprised. "It's supposed to. It's a C-sharp diminished seventh. It leads here." He played the resolving chord, and the tension in the room eased. "You understand," he said, a note of wonder in his voice. "I studied theory at Radcliffe," she said simply, "before I was taught that a woman's only assets were her lineage and her marriageability." He began to talk, truly talk. He told her about the business, not just the cold facts, but the pressures, the risks. He spoke of a rival, Marcus Thorne, a new money brute who had clawed his way up and despised Arthur's old money facade, who was trying to orchestrate a hostile takeover of his shipping line, and she, in turn, opened up to him. She spoke of the suffocating pressure of being a Sinclair, the humiliation of her family's quiet poverty, and the cold, pragmatic decision to sell herself to save them. "I thought you were just another purchase," she admitted softly, standing by the piano as he played. "I thought you were just part of the contract," he replied, his hands never ceasing their movement. "An ornament for the house, a hostess for my dinners. I was wrong." The ice around the cold Duke was thawing, and Evelyn found that the man beneath was not cold at all, but intensely warm, passionate and burdened. The emotional emptiness of their marriage was being filled, note by note. The inevitable conflict arrived not from Wall Street, but from the underworld that serviced the jazz age. The Crimson Key was a speakeasy, and that meant it relied on bootleggers. Arthur, with his fastidious nature, had secured a reliable, quiet supplier. But that supplier was being pushed out. A new, brutal gangster named Knuckles Russo had taken over the Harlem territory. Russo was not a subtle man. He dealt in extortion, violence, and intimidation. One night, Evelyn arrived at the club to find it in disarray. Tables were overturned, broken glass littered the floor, and the beautiful mahogany bar was deeply scarred by an axe. She found Arthur in the back office, his face a mask of cold fury she recognized from his Wall Street persona. Sadie was there, her arms crossed, her face tight with worry. "He came in this afternoon," Sadie said, her voice trembling slightly. "Russo, he and his thugs, said we're buying our liquor from him now at triple the price, or he's going to redecorate with fire." "This is not a negotiation," Arthur said, his voice deadly quiet. "This is extortion." "Art, these men are not your banking rivals," Sadie pleaded. "You can't outthink them. They're animals." "They've underestimated who they're dealing with," Arthur said. "What are you going to do?" Evelyn asked, stepping forward. Arthur looked at her, his protective instincts flaring. "You are going home, Evelyn. This is my world, and it has just become dangerous. You will not return here until I have handled this." "Handled how? By paying him? He'll just bleed you dry. By fighting him." "Sadie is right. You're a musician and a banker, not a gangster." "I will handle it," he repeated, his tone final. But Evelyn was no longer the passive wife. "No," she said, her voice ringing with an authority that made both Arthur and Sadie look at her. "You are Art here. You are the musician. But I am Mrs. Arthur Harrington, the Duchess of Fifth Avenue. These thugs think they are attacking a simple club owner. They have no idea they are attacking the Harrington Empire." "Evelyn, this is not a society luncheon," Arthur argued, frustrated. "No," she agreed, her mind working with the same cold, analytical speed she had seen him use. "It's a problem of assets and liabilities. Russo is a liability. You've been trying to keep your two worlds separate, Arthur, but right now, your greatest asset is the one you've been hiding. You are Arthur Harrington." Taylor's time the Cold Duke went to war for the Crimson Key. Arthur stared at her, seeing not just the elegant debutante, but a strategist, a partner. "What do you have in mind?" he asked. "Russo operates in the shadows," Evelyn said, "but he still has to use the infrastructure of the city. He uses trucks, he uses warehouses, he has bank accounts even if they're under false names. You, Mr. Harrington, own a shipping line. You control half the warehousing on the west side, and your bank. Your bank knows where every dollar in this city moves. You're not going to fight him in the alley with a gun. You're going to bankrupt him from your office on Wall Street." A slow, dangerous smile spread across Arthur's face. It was the smile of the Cold Duke, who had just spotted a weakness in the market. "Mrs. Harrington," he said, a new warmth in his voice, "you are truly remarkable." "I know," Evelyn replied. "Now, let's go over your ledgers. All of them. They worked through the night, not in the study but in the club's back office. For the first time, Arthur's two worlds merged. He brought his financial acumen, his contacts in the city's highest echelons, the police commissioner, the district attorney, the bank presidents, all of whom owed him favors. Evelyn brought her social intelligence, her understanding of leverage, and an unexpectedly ruthless strategic mind. While Arthur made quiet phone calls, pulling strings and calling in markers, Evelyn spoke with Sadie and the staff. She gathered information, Russo's delivery schedules, the names of his front businesses, the patrol routes of the beat cops he had on his payroll. They were a team. The cold, calculated power of Wall Street was being aimed like a rifle at a single Harlem gangster. Arthur arranged for surprise police raids on Russo's warehouses, citing prohibition violations. He had his bank compliance officers flag Russo's accounts for irregular activity, freezing his assets. He used his shipping influence to lose a critical import of Canadian whiskey that Russo was depending on. It was a silent, bloodless coup. Within a week, Russo was crippled, his operation in chaos, his funds inaccessible, and the district attorney, a close friend of the Harrington family, suddenly interested in indicting him for tax evasion. Russo, furious and desperate, realized he had been outmaneuvered, not by a club owner but by a powerhouse. He knew he couldn't touch Arthur Harrington directly, so he decided to hit him where he lived. One evening, Evelyn was returning from a charity luncheon. The Fifth Avenue mansion was quiet. Mrs. Davies, the housekeeper, was out. Arthur was still at the bank. She was in her suite, changing her dress, when she heard a noise downstairs. Not the familiar sound of the staff, but the sharp scrape of a boot on the marble foyer. Her blood ran cold. She grabbed the telephone, but the line was dead. Russo's men. They had cut the line. She backed away from the door, her heart hammering. She heard two men, their voices rough. "The Duke ain't here. Russo said grab the dame. She's our insurance." Evelyn's mind raced. Panic was a luxury she couldn't afford. She was a Sinclair and a Harrington. She would not be insurance. She locked the bedroom door, buying herself seconds. She looked around the opulent room. A cage, she had once called it. Now it was a trap. The window. She ran to it, overlooking the rear garden. It was a 3-story drop. Impossible. The men began to slam their shoulders against the heavy oak door. Crack. Evelyn's eyes darted around the room. On Arthur's side of the sitting room, he had started spending more time in her wing, though they still maintained the facade of separate quarters, was a heavy bronze statue of Atlas. It was an award from his bank. She grabbed it. It was heavier than she expected. She crouched behind the door, her breath held, her arms aching. The door splintered and burst open. Two men in dark coats and fedoras spilled in. "There she is!" one grunted, lunging for her. Evelyn swung the statue with all the force of her terror and rage. It connected with the first man's head with a sickening thud. He crumpled to the floor. The second man, shocked, reached inside his coat. A gun. "Evelyn!" A roar from the hallway. Arthur. He must have come home, seen the cut phone line, the forced door. He launched himself into the room, not as the cold Duke, but as a primal force. He tackled the second gunman just as the man fired. The bullet went wild, shattering a priceless Ming vase. The two men rolled on the floor in a brutal, desperate fight. Arthur was strong, but the gangster was a brawler. The gun skidded across the polished wood floor, stopping near Evelyn's feet. The gangster shoved Arthur off, scrambling for the weapon. Evelyn didn't hesitate. She kicked the gun, sending it sliding under the massive 4-poster bed. The gangster snarled and pulled a knife. He lunged at Arthur, who was just getting to his feet. "No!" Evelyn screamed, and threw the bronze statue again. It hit the man square in the back. He stumbled, giving Arthur the opening he needed. Arthur's fist connected with the man's jaw in a precise, brutal blow. The man fell back, his head hitting the bedpost, and lay still. The room was suddenly shockingly silent, save for their ragged breathing. Dust motes danced in the shaft of light from the window. Arthur, his suit torn, a cut bleeding over his eye, stared at the two unconscious men. Then he looked at Evelyn, who was trembling, still clutching the heavy base of the statue. He crossed the room in 2 strides, pulling her into his arms. He held her so tightly she could barely breathe, his face buried in her hair. "You're safe," he murmured, his voice thick with a raw emotion she had never heard from him. "You're safe." Evelyn clung to him, the adrenaline draining away, leaving her weak-kneed. She had been terrified, but she had also fought back. He pulled back, his hands framing her face, his grey eyes scanning her frantically. Did they hurt you? Are you all right?" "I'm fine," she whispered. "Arthur, your eye." "It's nothing." He touched the cut on his forehead, then looked at her, his expression a mixture of awe, terror, and a fierce, undeniable pride. "Evelyn, that statue." A shaky laugh escaped her. "I suppose I found a practical use for your banking award." He stared at her, and the last wall of ice between them shattered. The cold Duke and the Duchess were gone. There was only Arthur and Evelyn, standing in the wreckage of her bedroom, breathing the same air. "This has gone too far," he said, his voice grim. "My world, my secrets, they almost got you killed." "No," she said, her hand coming up to touch his cheek. "Our world, and we fought for it. Together." He looked at her, truly seeing the woman she was. Not a contract, not an asset, but his partner, his equal. The woman who had faced down his enemies, both in his club and in his home. Slowly, tenderly, Arthur Harrington leaned down and kissed his wife. It was not the chaste, cold kiss of their wedding day. It was a kiss of desperation, of relief, and of a profound, newly discovered love. It was a kiss that tasted of adrenaline and victory, a promise that the silence between them was broken, forever. The aftermath of the attack was swift and decisive. Arthur Harrington, now fully roused, used the incident as the final piece of leverage. The attempted kidnapping of the wife of one of the city's most powerful financiers was not something the authorities could ignore, especially not when the financier in question had the police commissioner on his private line. Knuckles Russo and his entire organization were rounded up within hours, their reign of terror brought to an abrupt and public end. The event, however, had shaken Arthur to his core. As he sat in the study, a bandage over his eye, while Evelyn calmly directed the staff to clean up the mess in her suite, he came to a stark realization. His partitioned life was no longer sustainable. It was a liability, not just to his reputation, but to Evelyn's safety. "I have to sell it," he announced that evening, his voice heavy. Evelyn, who was arranging a vase of fresh flowers to replace the shattered Ming, paused. "Sell what?" "The Crimson Key. All of it. The music, the Speakeasy. Russo is gone, but there will be others. I will not put you in that kind of danger again. My father was right. It's a weakness." Evelyn put down the flowers and faced him. "Is that what you think this was? A weakness? Arthur, what we did, we protected that club. We protected those people, the music. That wasn't weakness, that was strength, your strength. The cold Duke and Art, the musician, you used both to win. And it almost cost me you," he said, his voice raw. "But it didn't," she insisted, walking over to him. She sat on the arm of his chair, a gesture of intimacy that would have been unthinkable months ago. "You can't sell it, Arthur. It's not just a club. It's your soul. If you sell it, you will go back to being the cold Duke full-time. And I'm not sure I'm willing to be married to that man anymore. I much prefer Art." He looked up at her, his grey eyes searching hers. "But the risk, and my reputation, the attack on you, it's all over the society pages. My competitors are circling, trying to find out why. Thorne, especially. He smells blood in the water. He's been digging, trying to find a link between me and Harlem, Marcus Thorne, the rival who despised Arthur's old money facade, who was still trying to take over the Harrington shipping line." "So," Evelyn said, a daring idea forming in her mind. "Stop hiding. What are you talking about? I told you, if Wall Street finds out, I'll be ruined. They'll see me as unstable." "Will they?" Evelyn stood, her mind alight. "Or will they see you as an innovator? It's 1924, Arthur. The world is changing. This jazz age, it's not a fad. It's the new sound. It's the new culture. You're not just a pianist in a speakeasy, you're a patron. You're an investor in the future." He stared at her as if she were mad. "They will see a banker frequenting an illegal integrated club in Harlem. It's social and financial suicide." "Not if you control the narrative," Evelyn said, her eyes glittering. "You don't hide it, you host it. We will throw a party, not a stuffy dinner on Fifth Avenue, a gala, at the Crimson Key. We will invite every banker, every society matron, every politician on your list. We will bring Fifth Avenue to Harlem." "They won't come," he said flatly. "They will," Evelyn countered, "because they are terrified of being boring, because they are desperate for a thrill, and because Mrs. Arthur Harrington is inviting them to the most exclusive, most dangerous, most talked-about event of the season. We won't present it as a dirty secret. We will present it as the pinnacle of modern culture. A patronage gala for the new American music." Arthur was silent. The audacity of the plan was staggering. It was a gamble that would make his riskiest stock market plays look tame. It would mean merging his two worlds completely, irrevocably, in front of everyone. "Thorn will be there," he said. "He will use it to destroy me." "Only if you let him," Evelyn said, placing her hand on his. "You are Arthur Harrington. You own the bank, you own the shipping line, and you own the Crimson Key. Stop apologizing for it. It's time to own all of it together." He looked at her, at this brilliant, brave woman who had turned his world upside down, who had fought gangsters with a statue, and who was now proposing a social revolution to save his soul. The cold Duke was a man of calculated risks. Art was a man of passion. This plan, it required both. "A gala," he said, a slow, dangerous smile, the smile of art spreading across his face. "At the Crimson Key. My God, Evelyn. It's madness." "No," she replied, smiling back. "It's practical." The next 2 weeks were a blur of frantic, secret activity. While Arthur consolidated his financial defenses against Marcus Thorne, anticipating the fallout, Evelyn wielded her social power like a weapon. She hand-delivered the invitations, heavy cream-colored cardstock embossed with a simple, elegant crimson key. The buzz was instantaneous. "Harlem? Harrington? Is it safe?" The city's elite were scandalized, horrified, and utterly, desperately intrigued. To refuse an invitation from the Harringtons was a social slight, but to accept, it was an adventure. Evelyn, with practiced ease, framed it as a bold philanthropic gesture. "Arthur and I believe in the future of American music. It is the sound of the new generation. We are simply providing a curated experience." Marcus Thorne accepted, his RSVP note dripping with false sincerity. "I am eager to see your new investment, Harrington. I'm sure it will be illuminating." The night of the gala arrived. The Crimson Key was transformed. It was still a speakeasy, but the rough edges had been polished. Thousands of white lilies, Evelyn's signature flower, filled the room, their scent mingling with the smoke and perfume. The tables were draped in black linen. The champagne, flowing freely, was the best. Evelyn stood at the entrance, a vision in a beaded crimson gown that matched the club's name, her pearls gleaming. Arthur stood beside her, magnificent in a perfectly tailored tuxedo. He was, for the first time, one man. The cold Duke and Art united. The guests arrived, stepping out of their limousines with nervous, excited titters. They were the titans of industry, the matriarchs of old money families, the politicians, and the power brokers. They entered the disguised tailor shop, gave the password, and descended the stairs, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear and thrill. What they found was not a den of iniquity, but a palace of culture. Sadie and the band, dressed in their finest, began to play. The music, the soul of the Crimson Key, washed over the stunned crowd. Marcus Thorne arrived late, his broad face set in a predatory sneer. He found Arthur by the bar. "Well, Harrington," Thorne boomed, loud enough for those nearby to hear, "I must say I'm impressed. I knew you had unusual appetites, but this, hosting your banker friends in an illegal gin joint, surrounded by, well," he gestured vaguely at the integrated crowd. "It's a bold move, a reckless one. The board of the bank will be fascinated to hear about their chairman's hobby." Arthur, who would have once frozen or lashed out, simply smiled, a calm, assured expression. "Marcus, so glad you could make it," he signaled to the stage. "If you'll excuse me." He walked onto the stage where a microphone stood. A hush fell over the room. Evelyn moved to the front, her gaze locked on her husband. "Good evening." Arthur's voice, amplified, filled the club. It was the clear, commanding voice of Wall Street. "Welcome. I know many of you are surprised to be here." A few nervous chuckles. "For years I have lived two lives. One as the man you know, Arthur Harrington, a banker, a practical man." He glanced at Thorne, who was watching him like a hawk. "And I have been criticized, perhaps fairly, for being cold." He then turned his gaze to Evelyn, and his entire expression softened. "My wife, Evelyn, taught me that a life lived only for practicality is no life at all. She reminded me that passion, art, and music are not liabilities. They are the only assets that truly matter." He walked over to the piano and sat down. The entire room held its breath. "My other life," he said, his fingers resting on the keys, "is art, and this is my home." He began to play. It was not a chaotic, wild jazz piece. It was a melody that started with the classical precision of Chopin, a nod to the world he had left behind, and then, slowly, brilliantly, it melted. The chords shifted, the rhythm changed, and it transformed into a soaring, powerful, modern blues. It was a piece of music that told his entire story, his loss, his sacrifice, his coldness, and the fiery, passionate release he found in this room. It was, quite simply, genius. When he finished, there was a moment of stunned silence. Then the room exploded. It was not polite applause, it was a roar. The guests, the bankers, the dowagers, they were all on their feet, cheering, captivated. They hadn't seen a weak man. They had seen a visionary, a man of profound depth and passion they had never suspected. Evelyn, her eyes shining with tears, started clapping first. Thorne was apoplectic. His scandal had just been turned into Arthur's greatest triumph. He saw his hostile takeover, his leverage evaporating. He strode toward the exit, defeated. Arthur stood up from the piano and took Evelyn's hand, pulling her onto the stage with him. "This is not just my club," he announced, his voice thick with emotion as he held his wife's hand aloft. "This is our passion. This is the Crimson Key. And this," he said, looking directly at Evelyn, "is my wife, my partner, the woman who saved my soul." He leaned in and kissed her, right there on the stage, in front of Wall Street and all of high society. The crowd went wild. The band struck up the most joyful, defiant Charleston, and Arthur led Evelyn onto the dance floor. The Cold Duke and his Duchess danced, surrounded by their friends from Harlem and their associates from Fifth Avenue. Their two worlds merged at last, in a perfect, harmonious, and truly roaring chord. Phew, that was quite the ride. I'm really enjoying where this is going. It's fascinating to see Evelyn become the strategist and for Arthur to finally embrace both sides of himself. Okay, just checking in. This seems like a great place to pause. We've had the big confrontation, the merging of their worlds, and a solid romantic victory. We're at the halfway point of the story, chapter 7 of 15. As per our plan, this is where I include the mid-story CTA. Here it is, as requested. Where in the world are you watching this story from? We love hearing from our community. Please let us know in the comments, and if you're enjoying this journey with Evelyn and Arthur, please consider subscribing to the channel. Alright, I'm ready to dive into the second half. This chapter has really set the stage for their happily ever after, but there are still threads to tie up. How do they navigate this new public life? What does their marriage look like now, as true partners? I'm excited to write it. Let's proceed. The gala at the Crimson Key was more than a triumph. It was a societal earthquake. The next morning's papers were not filled with the scandal Marcus Thorne had anticipated, but with breathless, awestruck praise. The New York Herald Tribune called it a new era of patronage, declaring Arthur Harrington the modern Medici of the jazz age. The society pages, penned by columnists who had attended, gushed over the vibrant authenticity and bold vision of the Harringtons. Overnight, Arthur's secret weakness had been rebranded as an eccentric, brilliant and powerful symbol of the new modern wealth. Instead of facing ruin, Arthur found himself at the center of a new kind of power. His cold reputation was instantly transformed. He was now seen as a man of hidden depths, a cultural visionary as well as a financial wizard. His rivals, including a suitably humiliated Marcus Thorne, were forced to retreat, their plans to paint him as unstable, now looking foolish and antiquated. But the most profound change occurred not on Wall Street, but on Fifth Avenue. The Harrington mansion, once a cold museum of opulence, began to change. The heavy velvet curtains were drawn back. The stifling silence was broken. Laughter, Evelyn's and increasingly Arthur's, was heard in the halls. Arthur no longer used the West Wing. He moved his personal effects into Evelyn's suite, a move that was unspoken but deeply significant. The vast, empty house began to feel like a home. Their marriage, born of a cold contract, was being renegotiated daily, not with terms, but with shared glances, quiet conversations, and a burgeoning tender intimacy. "I never thought," Arthur confessed one evening, as they sat together in the study, "that I could have both, the bank and the music. It felt like a betrayal of my father, or a betrayal of myself." "You're not betraying him," Evelyn said softly, tracing the rim of her wine glass. "You're honoring him in your own way. You saved his empire, and you're honoring yourself by breathing. You're allowed to be happy, Arthur." This, he found, was the hardest adjustment. For years, his life had been a fortress of control, his emotions locked away. Evelyn had not just breached the walls, she had taken up residence inside. He found himself watching her, fascinated. He watched her manage the household with a sharp, intelligent grace. He watched her read poetry in the garden. He watched her debate politics with senators at their now lively dinner parties. He had married her for her name. He was falling in love with her for her mind. Their relationship, which had bypassed courtship entirely, now entered a new, tentative phase. He would come home from the bank, not retreating to his ledgers, but seeking her out. He brought her small, thoughtful gifts, a rare first edition of an Edna St. Vincent Millay poem, a ridiculous jewel-encrusted cloche hat she had admired in a window, and she, in turn, began to understand his world. She read the Wall Street Journal, not because she had to, but because she wanted to understand the pressures he faced. Thorne sold his shares in the shipping line, she noted one morning at breakfast. Arthur lowered his paper, a smile touching his lips. He did. At a significant loss. It seems he's lost his appetite for hostile takeovers. A pity, Evelyn said, her eyes glittering. I was just beginning to enjoy the game. He laughed. A real, genuine laugh. Evelyn Harrington, you are a dangerous woman. Only to dangerous men, she replied. Their nights at the Crimson Key continued, but they were different. They were no longer a secret escape. They were a celebration. The club became the most exclusive ticket in town, a place where the city's elite now clamored to get in, eager to rub elbows with the poets and musicians who had been there all along. Arthur, protective of the club's original spirit, established a foundation, funded by his Harrington wealth, to support the artists. He and Evelyn ran it together. It became a true patronage, ensuring the Crimson Key would never be dependent on the whims of society or the threats of gangsters. One snowy December evening, about a month after the gala, they were at the club. It was late and the crowd was thinning. Sadie was on stage, singing a slow, smoky ballad, her voice wrapping around the room like a velvet cloak. Arthur and Evelyn sat in their usual booth. He wasn't playing tonight, he was just listening, his arm resting lightly on the back of the seat behind her. She's singing about you, you know, Evelyn murmured, sipping her champagne. She's singing a blues song, Arthur replied, amused. Exactly. My man's got two faces but one good heart. She wrote it last week. She thinks you're the most romantic figure in New York. She's clearly delusional, he scoffed, but he was pleased. I don't know, Evelyn said, turning to look at him. The low crimson light of the club softened the severe lines of his face, warming his grey eyes. Hair-cold, ruthless duke of finance, secretly a passionate musical genius who fights gangsters to protect his art. It's rather an appealing narrative. You're the one who wrote it, he said, his voice dropping. I'm the one who published it, she corrected softly. The music swirled around them, a perfect, intimate soundtrack. He looked at her, at the intelligent sparkle in her violet eyes, at the soft curve of her lips. The contract that had bound them felt like a lifetime ago. Evelyn, he said, his voice hesitant, all traces of the cold duke gone. The terms of our arrangement, they were very practical. Separate rooms, a marriage of convenience. I recall, she said, her heart giving a strange, hopeful leap. I find those terms no longer practical, he said. He took her hand, his thumb brushing over the massive diamond he had given her. The glittering manacle, she had once called it. It felt different now. I did not marry you for love, Evelyn, he said, his honesty as stark and clear as it had been on their wedding day. I married you to save my reputation, and you married me to save your family. It was a transaction. It was, she agreed, her voice quiet. I would like, he said, to propose a new contract. Oh? And what are the terms of this one? This one, he said, lifting her hand to his lips and kissing her knuckles, is less practical. It has only one clause. Which is? He met her gaze, his grey eyes full of a warmth and vulnerability she had once thought impossible. That you, Evelyn Harrington, might find it in your heart to love me, as I have, quite desperately and in practicality, fallen in love with you. Evelyn's breath caught. This was the one thing she had never allowed herself to want, the one outcome she had never dared to imagine. She had found respect, she had found partnership, she had found passion. But love, it seemed too much to ask. Arthur, she whispered, her own emotions so long held in check by Sinclair pride, rising to the surface. I think I have been in love with art for weeks, and I'm beginning to realize they are the same man. He let out a breath he seemed to have been holding since their wedding day. And the separate quarters clause? He asked, a hopeful, boyish smile transforming his face. I find it highly impractical, Evelyn replied, smiling through the sudden happy tears in her eyes. He stood, pulling her gently to her feet. He didn't kiss her. Not yet. He simply held her, right there in the middle of their club, as Sadie's voice soared on a final, triumphant note. It was not an ending. It was a true beginning. They left the club, not as two separate entities, but as one, walking out into the snowy Harlem night, ready to go home. The journey from impractical love to a shared life was a quieter, more profound adventure than their battle with gangsters or the reorganization of high society. Arthur, having admitted his love, found himself completely disarmed by it. The cold Duke had been a role he played, a suit of armor he wore for so long he had mistaken it for his own skin. Now, with Evelyn, he was simply Arthur. He found joy in the mundane. He relished the simple act of waking up next to her, the sight of her hair spilled across the pillow, the quiet intimacy of sharing the morning paper, their knees touching under the table. He, a man who had commanded boardrooms and built financial empires, discovered that his greatest pleasure was making his wife laugh. Evelyn, in turn, blossomed. The heavy weight of duty and sacrifice she had carried for her family lifted. Her pragmatic marriage had, against all odds, become the love story of the decade. She was no longer just a hostess or an ornament. She was a partner. Arthur, who had once dismissed all opinions but his own, now actively sought her counsel. She sat in on his business meetings, her sharp insights often cutting through the bluster of his associates. Mrs. Harrington, one of his older, more conservative banking partners, remarked after a meeting, has a mind like a steel trap. But, he added, leaning in, she wields it like a velvet glove. You are a lucky man, Arthur. I am well aware of that, Arthur replied, his gaze finding Evelyn across the room, a look of such open adoration that the partner blushed. Their life became a seamless blend of their two worlds. Days were spent in the roaring optimistic furnace of 1920s finance, navigating the bull market, expanding the Harrington assets. Arthur taught Evelyn about the market, about investments, about the flow of global capital. She, a natural strategist, took to it immediately, starting her own small, successful investment portfolio, which she managed with a shrewdness that impressed even her husband. Evenings were for the Crimson Key. They went to Harlem not as patrons, but as family. Evelyn worked with Sadie, not just on the club's finances, but on new ventures. They used the Harrington Foundation to open a music school for the talented children of Harlem, giving them the classical training and the modern freedom that Arthur himself had craved. Pops, the young trumpet player, became its first star pupil. Their home on Fifth Avenue became a new kind of salon. On any given night, one might find a steel magnate, a U.S. senator, and a blues singer like Sadie engaged in a heated, passionate debate in the Grand Library, with Arthur playing softly on the Steinway in the corner. Evelyn had broken down the rigid barriers of New York society, creating a space where finance, politics, and art collided. "You've ruined me, you know," Arthur murmured one night as they dressed for the opera. He was fastening a necklace of sapphires, his grandmother's, around her neck. His hands lingered on her shoulders. "Oh, and how have I done that?" she asked, meeting his eyes in the mirror. "I can no longer abide those dreadfully boring dinners at the Vanderbilts. They don't have a single decent pianist, and their conversation is uninspired. You've spoiled me for polite society." "Then polite society will just have to catch up," she said, turning in his arms. "Or we shall simply have to stay home." "Staying home," he said, his voice dropping as he leaned in to kiss her, "is my new favorite practical investment." Their happiness was a tangible thing, a warm light that filled the once cold house. But the past had one last echo. One afternoon, Evelyn received a letter. It was from her father. The Sinclairs, having been saved from ruin by Arthur's intervention, were comfortably re-established in Boston. She had not seen them since the wedding. The letter was stiff, formal, but contained a summons. Her mother was ill, and her father requested Evelyn's presence. "I have to go," she told Arthur, holding the letter. "Of course," he said immediately, his face creased with concern. "I'll clear my schedule. We'll take the private train car." "No," Evelyn said, placing a hand on his chest. "I need to do this alone. When I left, I was their daughter, the asset they sold. I need to return as myself. As your wife, yes, but as Evelyn." Arthur understood. He saw the shadow in her eyes, the last piece of her old life that needed to be put right. He kissed her forehead. "I will be here when you get back, and if you need me, I am only a telephone call away." Evelyn traveled to Boston alone. The Sinclair townhouse, which had once seemed the epitome of aristocratic grace, now felt small, dark and stifling. The air was thick with the scent of old furniture and unspoken resentments. Her mother was not gravely ill, it turned out. It had been a pretext. Her father, a man who resembled a faded portrait of himself, was waiting for her in his study. "Evelyn," he said, not rising, "you look, well. Marriage suits you." "I am very happy, father," she said, her voice clear and strong. She was no longer the frightened, dutiful girl. She was Mrs. Arthur Harrington, a partner in an empire and a woman in love. "Yes, well," her father harumphed, shuffling papers. "It appears your transaction was a success. We are financially stable. Your brother is at Harvard." He paused. "There is, however, the matter of the dowry." Evelyn blinked. "The dowry. Harrington, in his efficiency, settled our debts, but there was no formal dowry paid to him for your hand. It is a matter of Sinclair honor. I wish to regularize the account." Evelyn finally understood. He hadn't called her here out of concern. He had called her here to settle a ledger, to erase the shame of his failure. "You called me from New York implying my mother was dying," Evelyn said, her voice deadly quiet. "To discuss a dowry? A payment for me?" "It is a matter of propriety," he blustered, his face reddening. "No, father," Evelyn said, standing tall. "It is a matter of pride. Your pride. You sold me. Let's not dress it up as anything else. You sold me to save this house, to save your name, and I went, because I thought my duty to that name was more important than my own life." She walked to his desk and leaned forward, her hands flat on the polished mahogany. "But you see, you made a mistake. You thought you were trading me for a pile of cold, hard assets. You thought I was marrying a man just like you, a man who cared only for ledgers and bloodlines." She smiled, a cold, sharp smile that was all Harrington. "But my husband, father, is a man of passion and art and loyalty. He is a man who would fight gangsters for his friends and tear down Wall Street for his wife. He is a better man than you will ever be. You didn't sell me. You freed me." She stood up straight. "There will be no dowry. My value is not something you can write in a ledger. My marriage is not a transaction for you to regularize. It is a partnership. It is a love." She turned and walked to the door. "My mother looks perfectly healthy. Give her my love. I am returning to my husband, to my home." She left the study, her father sputtering in her wake. She walked out of the dark, stifling house, out of her past, and into the bright, clear Boston afternoon. She felt a profound sense of release. The last chain had been broken. When she arrived back at Grand Central Terminal, Arthur was there. He was standing on the platform, ignoring the stares of the crowd, his gaze fixed on the train door. The moment he saw her, his entire face lit up. He didn't wait. He strode forward, pulling her into his arms, kissing her deeply right there on the crowded platform. "I missed you," he murmured against her lips. "I missed you too," she whispered back, clinging to him. "How was it?" he asked, pulling back, his eyes full of concern. Evelyn smiled, a true, brilliant smile. "It was conclusive. I've closed the account." "Good," he said, taking her arm and guiding her toward the waiting limousine. "Because I have a surprise for you." "Oh? I've booked passage. On the Mauretania. We're going to Paris." Evelyn stopped, her eyes wide. "Paris? But the bank, the market." "The bank will survive," Arthur said, smiling. "I've decided it's time my wife had a proper honeymoon, one that doesn't involve contracts or stock portfolios, just music and art, and us." Evelyn looked at her husband, the cold duke who had become her passionate partner. "Arthur Harrington," she said, "you are without a doubt the most practical man I have ever known." He laughed, and together they walked out of the station into the roaring, brilliant chaos of their New York, their future stretching before them, as bright and limitless as the jazz age itself. The crossing on the Mauretania was a revelation. It was the first time Arthur and Evelyn had been truly alone, away from the demands of Wall Street, the joyous chaos of the Crimson Key, and the obligations of New York society. They were, for 2 glorious weeks at sea and in Paris, simply Mr. and Mrs. Harrington. They were a couple on their honeymoon. In Paris, the city of light and art, Arthur shed the last vestiges of the cold duke. He was utterly, completely art. He took Evelyn not to banks or embassies, but to the dimly lit, smoke-filled jazz clubs of Montmartre. He, the American prodigy, sat in on sessions with French musicians, his fingers finding a common language, his music earning him nods of deep respect. Evelyn watched him, her heart swelling with a quiet, profound joy. This was the man she loved, unguarded and free. She, in turn, immersed herself in the art, dragging him to see the experimental new works of Picasso and Matisse, debating their merits over bottles of wine in sidewalk cafes. They were equals, discovering the world and each other with a fresh, youthful enthusiasm that their practical marriage had initially denied them. They returned to New York in the full swing of 1925, no longer two entities joined by a contract, but a true, indivisible partnership. Their love, forged in secrets and solidified in conflict, had become their greatest asset. Their lives settled into a happy, dynamic rhythm. The Harrington Foundation for New American Music, under Evelyn's sharp guidance, became a major cultural force in the city. The Crimson Key was its soul, a thriving, protected space where musicians like Sadie and Pops, who was now a rising star, could experiment and flourish. Arthur remained a titan of Wall Street, but his methods changed. He was still a brilliant financier, but the cold, ruthless edge was gone, replaced by a more visionary, daring approach. He invested in new technologies, in art, in the very culture he was helping to shape. His competitors, who had once feared his coldness, now envied his Midas touch, failing to realize his greatest advisor was his wife. Their home on Fifth Avenue was a place of warmth and constant motion. The Grand Ballroom, which had hosted their cold, contractual wedding reception, was now the scene of raucous, joyful parties, where jazz bands played and bankers danced the Charleston with Broadway actresses. One crisp autumn evening, nearly 2 years after their wedding, Arthur came home early. This in itself was unusual. He found Evelyn in the study, curled on the sofa, reading a book of poetry. The setting sun cast a golden glow over the room. "For your home," she said, smiling, closing the book. "The market didn't crash, I hope." "The market is for once behaving itself," he said. He seemed nervous, his hands in his pockets, a stark contrast to his usual assured self. "Arthur, what is it?" He walked over and sat next to her, taking her hand. "Evelyn, when we married, it was a transaction. We both know that. And I have spent every day since then thanking God that you were the other half of that contract." "As have I," she said softly, her violet eyes searching his. "I gave you a diamond," he said, touching the great ring on her finger, "to seal a business deal, to buy your family's silence and your name. It was cold. It was empty." "It's just a ring, Arthur. It doesn't matter." "It matters to me," he insisted. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. It was not a jeweler's box. It was old, worn. "This," he said, his voice thick, "was my mother's. She was a musician. She was the one who taught me to play. She would have loved you." He opened the box. Inside, resting on faded silk, was a ring. It was not a massive, cold diamond. It was an intricate, beautiful Art Nouveau band of swirling gold, set with a single deep blue sapphire, the color of the twilight. "It's beautiful," Evelyn whispered. "I want to do this right," he said. He slid off the sofa and knelt on the Persian rug, taking her hand. "Arthur, what are you doing? Get up," she laughed, embarrassed and deeply touched. "Evelyn Sinclair Harrington," he said, ignoring her protest, his grey eyes looking up at her, devastatingly sincere. "I am a practical man, and practicality dictates that I should be married to the woman I love more than life itself, the woman who is my partner, my confidant, and my very soul. I was a fool to do it any other way. So, will you marry me? Again, properly this time." Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. The cold duke, the financial magnata, her brilliant, passionate art, was on one knee in their study, proposing. "You ridiculous, impractical, wonderful man," she whispered, pulling him to his feet. "Yes, 1,000 times, yes." He slipped the cold diamond, the symbol of their contract, off her finger. He replaced it with his mother's ring, the warm gold and deep blue sapphire sliding perfectly into place. It felt, Evelyn thought, like a final, perfect, resolving chord. He kissed her, a kiss that held all the passion of the Crimson Key and all the quiet, deep comfort of their home. "I have one more surprise," he murmured against her lips. "Another one? My heart can't take it." "This one," he said, a look of pure, unadulterated joy on his face, "is in the nursery. Mrs. Davies and we've been having the East Wing aired out." Evelyn's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes widening in disbelief. "Arthur, how did you... I am a man of finance, my love. I watch for signs, and I am also a man who hopes. We are..." Evelyn laughed through her tears, nodding, her own secret joy finally revealed. "We are. This spring." Arthur's shout of triumph echoed through the grand house, a sound of pure, unbridled happiness. He lifted her into his arms, spinning her around in the golden light of the study. The cold duke was gone forever, replaced by a husband and soon a father. They stood by the window, watching the lights of their city flicker on, a city they had in their own way conquered together. Arthur's arm was secure around her waist, her head resting on his shoulder, his mother's ring warm on her hand. They had started with a cold, practical contract, a merger of assets in the roaring, chaotic 1920s. But in the secret, smoky rooms of a Harlem speakeasy, they had found each other's souls. They had found that the most practical, valuable, and enduring asset of all was not wealth or power, but a love that was as bold, as passionate, and as transcendent as the music itself. This story teaches us that the greatest assets we possess are not the ones we list on a balance sheet, but the passions we hide in our hearts. True wealth is not found in cold, practical transactions, but in the brave, impractical decision to be vulnerable. It shows that love is not always a gentle melody, but can be a wild, defiant jazz rhythm that, when we are finally brave enough to share it, can merge our fractured worlds into a single, beautiful, and harmonious life. Before you go, if you loved this story of romance and secrets, please show your support. Click that like button and, more importantly, subscribe to the channel so you never miss another journey into the past. We are so grateful to have you here.